What is up, guys? In today's video, just a discussion video today, so be sure to chime in. This doesn't have to be an amen sermon. Be sure to let me know your thoughts. So today we're talking about budget smartphones versus older flagships. Which one should you get? So we look at a lot of older flagships on this channel, and the reason I like them so much is because the price to spec ratio is really great. Once these phones get a little older, they still retain really good value. But now I get this question a lot: should I get, just a new budget phone, or should I get like an older flagship like the 2018s, or maybe like the really early 2019 flagships that came out last year, and some even 2017. I still have a few 2017 flagships as well. So today we're going to be talking about that. I'm going to try to break it down so people that aren't so tech savvy can understand a little bit. Alright, so the price of an older flagship is usually around the same price as a newer budget smartphone to come out, with the exception of these iPhones. Now the iPhone X for the renewed version that I have right here costs around $400, and that's on Amazon. I'll put the links down below, but yeah, it's a little expensive. It's definitely up there. So some of them retain value. If you look at phones like a Galaxy S9, the LG V40, or even the LG G7, these phones are all around the $200 price point. You can easily find them on Amazon or eBay for that $200 price point. So usually, sometimes these iPhones can definitely be worth more money. So if you want something that is going to have a great resale value, then the iPhones are definitely ideal. iPhones, and usually the Galaxy phones, are usually you can get a good chunk of your money back. But these phones usually cost around the same amount, so it can make it a little tricky to decide which one to get. So like the Galaxy A51, you can easily find $250. Moto G8 Power, very popular, way under $200. Redmi Note 8 Pro, the Note 9S 2 is also around the $200 price point as well. So let's break it down step by step. So these older flagship phones, starting off with the hardware, usually have premium hardware. So it's usually a glass and metal design here, as you can see with the iPhone, the G7, the V40 also, and a bunch of other phones. Most flagship phones, even years ago, still have a premium solid design, which is really nice. Most budget phones still today are still going to be these plastic phones. They're not going to feel, of course, as premium as a glass and metal phone. The G Power plastic, it's usually the soft plastic. Now, design wise, I really do think that these phones have stepped it up a notch when it comes to just how they feel and how they look. A couple years ago, these budget phones really would not look on par with flagship phones, but a lot of these budget phones look really good. If you look at the A51, it's basically got the same design as an A71, and even if we saw the leaks of the A52, it still kind of looks like the A51. So it just goes to show that these designs are still really good. Now the Redmi Note 8 Pro is an exception. This actually has a glass back, and they do have a couple of phones. Xiaomi does a really good job with their smartphones, just making them really premium feeling. So it's not metal, this is still plastic, but this is actually glass, which is really nice. And this is a very beautiful phone as well, the pearl white color. So as you can see, they're kind of like neck and neck in terms of the hardware department. They do really look good, but they're not gonna feel as good, except for if you go for like the Xiaomi brand. But still, they design wise, they look good. They're not ugly phones, so I wouldn't really worry about it. All right, so let's talk about the displays here. So on older flagship phones usually still have excellent displays. So the iPhone has an OLED display. Most budget smartphones have an OLED display. The V40 is going to have an OLED display. So basically what that means, it's just the preferred display in the tech industry right now. On smartphones, you get deeper blacks, more vibrant colors. Now, with the exception of the A51, you actually have the Super AMOLED display on here, which is beautiful. You got the little punch hole as well, and the most budget phones usually have an IPS display, but they've actually caught up in resolution. So 1080p, the Redmi Note 8 Pro, this also has a 1080p display, so they look good. They have really good PPI, so they are really good. They have a punch hole, so I really feel like they're catching up, but as term in terms of, the AMOLED versus IPS, the AMOLED displays or OLED displays are still going to reign supreme over an IPS display. The G7 actually has a IPS display. It's 1440p though, with a really high PPI, so it just looks really beautiful. So it doesn't really, well, it would be nice if it had the OLED display, but just having that 1440p high PPI is just really awesome. So most of your budget phones are going to be stuck at 1080p, so you do have a lower resolution, but like I said, it still looks really good. So it's really neck and neck in terms of display quality. Now you do have a couple exceptions, like a phone that I really love. Let me wipe it down. The Bold M1, is it on? Yeah, I don't think it's on, but this phone actually has a full screen AMOLED display. It's one of my favorite budget smartphones. It does not have a notch or anything. Like I said, it's AMOLED full screen. So I absolutely love this phone. It's just really, really awesome. And yeah, so these phones have really caught up. Oh, hold on, you guys can see it. So no notch, just really awesome. And absolutely love it. So for media consumption, these phones have really caught up to these older flagship phones. So you can see in the next 2 years, these budget phones are just going to be really, really close to me, even the mid-range phones at this point, because all of these phones, $200, $200. These phones are really, really cheap right now. All right, guys, let's talk about software updates. So the budget smartphones used to be really bad with software updates, but they've actually done a really good job. And most of these phones usually get around 2 years of security updates, or will get the next version. Usually what I notice is it'll get the next version of Android, and then it won't get the next one after that. They'll usually give it to its successor, and they'll kind of forget about it. So it's kind of a tricky situation depending on how popular the phone is, and it will also take much longer. Now, if you're really crazy about having the latest software, I would highly recommend you go with like an older budget iPhone. These phones do a really good job with software. This one has iOS 14, of course, and the iPhone X should really get the next 2 versions of iOS, because it's still blazing fast thanks to the chip inside of it. So even the iPhone 7 that I really love got iOS 14. So if you're really crazy about having the latest version of your OS and getting it in a pretty timely manner, actually they all come out at the same time, iPhones are definitely your best bet. Android's a little bit trickier. Like, it took a really long time for Android 10 to get to the G7. I still don't have Android 10 on my B40, but that's mostly due to the carrier. So software updates can be tricky on Android. Samsung does a pretty good job at software updates, but again, it depends on how popular the phone is how much time is going to go into you waiting for the update. But as far as software, I still think budget smartphones do a pretty good job, but older flagship phones, especially if you get an iPhone, still do a really good job. Most companies will support your older flagship for at least 3 years. Like my OnePlus 7 Pro, that is supported, I believe, up to Android 12, which isn't terrible. That's pretty good. Now let's talk about gaming and performance. So this is where these older flagship smartphones really shine. So most of these older flagship phones, the V40, iPhone, LG, can play pretty much any game on high settings. I've done gaming tests on all these videos, and yeah, it can play games on high settings, unlike some of the budget smartphones, with the exception of the Note 8 Pro. This can play Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG, whatever, on high settings with this Helio G90T processor. So that is the exception, but most of them, like the G8, the A51, you won't be able to play everything on high settings. So yeah, for gaming, you definitely want to go with a older flagship phone, because these are still very powerful phones. The Snapdragon 845, if you got a phone like that, you can still play games on high. The iPhone is still really great with gaming as well. And also, I would say performance is just really good on all of these phones, actually. It depends on, again, which OS you like, but as far as performance and just RAM management, all of these phones do a really great job. Still, I'm not gonna say I've never really had an issue with these older budget smartphones in terms of speed and multitasking, and I've never really had a huge issue with these budget phones as well. I think they do a really good job. They usually cap out at around 4 gigs to 6 gigs of RAM. So definitely performance wise, these older flagship phones have just more beefier specs, and most of these phones do have little extra stuff. Like with LG, you'll get the quad DAC, and you'll also get, you'll always have NFC, your IP ratings on these older flagship phones. You won't have that on most budget phones. I can't think of any budget phone that has an IP rating actually. So all these budget phones, if you get them wet, drop them in the toilet, 9 times out of 10 they'll break. And most of them don't have wireless charging as well, except for the Bolden one. This has wireless charging, but you're not gonna get, those premium little flagship features that you would get with an older flagship phone. So these have wireless charging. They've got all that stuff. So let's go ahead and move on to the camera. Now the camera situation is kind of tricky depending on which smartphone. Me personally, I think the phones that have come out this year do a really good job with cameras with budget smartphones. I think they're very, very competitive, if not tied with these older flagship phones. And plus you get more lenses. Usually with these phones that are like 2 years old, you usually get around 2 lenses, which will be just the standard, and then you'll get an ultra wide. These newer cameras, you get the macro camera, you get the telephoto, you get all of the little cameras on here. So performance, if you guys have seen my videos, the A51, really good camera. Redmi Note 8 Pro, really good camera. The G8 is okay. I don't think it's better than these two, but it's definitely not a bad camera. These budget phones cameras are very competitive to these older flagship phones, in my opinion. Especially you can throw Gcam on them as well. You can also throw Gcam on these phones too, but I think it's definitely a tie when it comes to taking photos. Again, depending on which camera you go with. Now, I still think the iPhone and these older flagship phones do a really good job with video. Video hasn't really come a long way with these budget phones, I've noticed, so that's an area that it's definitely lacking in. But iPhone video, the V40 video is just really solid. I always prefer the video on that. I always notice the difference immediately. Now finally, let's talk about battery life. So this is an area where these budget phones really kill it, is in battery life. So you usually have phones with 4,000 milliamp battery, 5,000 milliamp batteries. I've seen some with close to 6, I believe. I think the Poco was like really close to 6,000 milliamp battery. So battery life on these budget phones are just absolutely crazy. They definitely kill these older flagship smartphones, most definitely. Usually I can get around more than a full day's use on like the Note 8 Pro or the G8 Power. Is just really good with battery life. The A51 is pretty decent, but they all seem to perform in battery life better than the V40, G7, even the iPhone, and a couple of more. So definitely it could be, some people would say, oh well, it's the battery health, but I really just think these phones just have these massive batteries, and I think overall, even if you replace the battery, you're still going to get better battery life on these budget phones. So that is one thing that I noticed this year, is just the increase with these huge batteries in these phones. What do you guys think? What are your opinions on this? Be sure to let me know, and I will catch you guys in the next one.